In this chapter, we're going to look at a few more basic user interface components that come with Telerik UI. We've handled buttons in the last chapter, so now we'll see how to add different kinds of inputs to our forms, including sliders, drop-downs, and text areas. We'll also convert our detail page interface to use a tab layout, and we'll complete the dashboard filtering requirement by adding a combo box for assignee selection. Just like we did in the last chapter, we're going to be referring to the documentation on the Telerik website, so make sure you have that open and handy because we're going to be doing some exercises as well. In this lesson, we'll be working on the add item form since it has a few simple inputs that we can transform to Kendo UI. In your sample application, go to backlog and then you can go to add, and here we are on the add new item page. The route is actually backlog/create, so our Razor page is called create. We're going to convert the title field, the description field, and the type dropdown, but we'll get to the dropdown in a bit. By using the documentation to help you out, try this out for yourself. Try to convert the title field and the description field to Telerik UI components. And you can pause the video to try this out on your own and come back when you're done. Did you try it? All right, let's do this together now. Let's head over to the code and make sure you're in the RPS web project. Let's go to Pages, Backlog, and then open up this create.cshtml file. This is where our title input is and our description text area. Now, right now, both the input and the text area are using the ASP.NET tag helpers, but we're going to convert these to Telerik UI components. Now, in order to get this done, let's head over to the documentation so we can reference that. And then the section you want to look for is editors because, well, text boxes and text areas are editors. So that's how they're categorized here. Scroll down to, well, let's start with text box and click on overview. Now you'll find some examples here, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're just going to copy this example right here by clicking this copy code button. And back in our code, I'm going to paste that entire line of code right in here after our input. Okay, and I'm going to stop my project from running. And you'll see that html.kendo lights up, and that's because in view imports, we've added this line using kendo.mbc.ui. Let me show you what happens if we don't have that line. I'm going to save this file, view imports, which is also in your pages folder. And let's go to create.cshtml. You'll see that Kendo is not recognized here, and that's because we need that import. So let's get that back in there, and now the underline goes away. So this is how we can create a Telerik UI component using the HTML helpers. If I delete text box here and then tap period, you'll see all my different components appear, and I can use all these, including text box and text area. So let's choose text box. And of course, I do need to provide the name, which in this case is going to be title, because it's going to match that property right there on the model. And our initial value is going to be nothing, because it's a blank text box since we're dealing with the create form. But if you did have to set an initial value, you can use that .value function. There's our HTML helper. And what I'm going to do is delete this input now that we don't need it. Let's have a look. I'm going to run this. We're going to go to the add screen, and you'll see that we have the title field as a Telerik UI component now. Now for the description, I could use the documentation, but I'm going to try to do this without the documentation and just write it out. So html.kendo, and then I'm going to guess this is text area. So let's select that one. That's a good name for it. Matches the HTML text area. And of course, we do need to provide the name, which is going to be description. So I'm going to copy that and paste it into here. Wonderful. Let's delete the text area now. That should automatically bind because of the name property that's been provided. Both of these components are now Telerik UI components, but you'll notice that they don't stretch across the entire screen, which is the way we had it in the original form. All right, no problem. We'll fix that in a moment. Right now, I just want to do a little test. So we'll title this Alex Test and save this and make sure that that does in fact save. And there it is. Okay, so let's close this out, and we're going to add another property here. So the text box does have another method on it where we can alter the HTML attributes or add HTML attributes by using the HTML attributes extension method. Here we're going to provide a new object with the HTML attributes that we want to add. So in this case, we want to add the style, and this is going to be a string we're going to make the width 100% of the screen, of the available space. So this is going to stretch out our text box to be 100%. I'm going to copy that HTML attributes and paste it on our text area as well. I can also add a height of 60 pixels just to get a little bit of variety in there. Now, what's important to note here is that you can add any HTML attributes into this object, and that'll end up being rendered when your document is rendered. Let's take a look. Let's go to the add form, and as you can see, our text box and text area stretch all the way across. Now, there's one more thing I want to mention here, and we did choose the HTML helper route. Of course, you do have the option of using tag helpers as well. And as you can see, the tag helper syntax is a little less verbose, so we could potentially use this instead. I'm going to just paste that in right here, and you can see that the name can be replaced with title, and the style can actually just be an attribute on its own. So I'm going to copy width equals 100%, and I'm going to delete the text box HTML helper just to show you. Let's run this project. Now on the backlog, we're going to go to add, and you'll see that the result is exactly the same. There's one more component here, and that one is called DropdownList. Let's head over to the documentation, and under editors, you see DropdownList here. This is the one that we're going to use to select the type of item. You can use either the HTML helper here or the DropdownList tag helper. We're going to implement this using tag helpers, but before I do that, as an exercise, why don't you try and implement that yourself? So right now, all we have here is this select. Go ahead and try doing this yourself, and we'll come back in the next lesson to take a look at more dropdowns. Were you able to convert this select HTML element to a dropdown list? Let's do this together now. First, I want to implement this using HTML helpers because there is a little bit of a difference in the way HTML helpers work and the tag helpers in this case. So here we are on the create.cshtml page, and I have this select, which is just an HTML select that's being converted to an ASP.NET Core tag helper. As you can see, we're binding to type string, which is an enum, and our items collection is item types. I'm going to open that up so we can see what we're dealing with here on the back end in the model. Here's the value. We're binding this property right here, and this is the type string, which is of item type enum. And here are the types. We're returning a select list here, which is a very common type to use when binding drop-down lists in ASP.NET. And this is returning an IEnumerable of select list item. I'm going to convert this select on the front end to an HTML helper here using Kendo. And I'm going to say HTML Kendo. I'm going to select the drop-down list helper here. Let's not forget to give it a name. Now this name must match the property name that we're binding to. So this type string right here. Otherwise, when the form posts back, it's not going to know how to bind that property. So I'm going to paste that here, and there it is. Type string is the name. And then we're going to use bind to give it the collection of items we want to bind to, which in this case is on the model, item types. I'm going to remove our select right here and just use the Kendo dropdown. So let's take a look at that. And there we go. There's our Kendo dropdown. It has the default theme applied. You can see that by the orange color here. And we can select whichever type for this item that we want. Let's just test this out real quick. Item 1, and it's a PBI. I'm going to add it. This will navigate us to the list. And there it is. The first item on the list is item 1. The little star indicates that it's a PBI or product backlog item type. Let's go back to the add page. So this was an HTML helper, but let's try doing this using a tag helper. I'm going to keep this one around for now, and instead I'm going to try the tag helper. So I'm going to say Kendo dash and then control space to get my list, drop-down list. Let's give it a name. I'm going to call it the same thing, type string. Now you can't have two widgets with the same ID or the same name on the page, otherwise that'll confuse the library. So I'm going to just rename this one to type string 2. So this is the one that we're trying to support right now. And we're going to also provide the bind to attribute, which is going to be model item types. Now with the drop-down list, we need to give it an initial value as well. So I'm going to specify the value to be model.typestring. When we first show this page, we need to make sure that typestring is actually set. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to go to the back end, and there's the onGet function. This is the function that gets executed when we call the page initially. And we are setting typestring to bug. Great. I'm going to refresh the page, and you'll see that we have two dropdowns now. This is the HTML helper, and this is the tag helper. I'm going to select impediment here. Pay attention to that. and then new item 2. Let's save this. Well, there's our new item 2, but it didn't save as an impediment. What happened here? Well, this is a little bit of a gotcha, and you need to pay attention to this. What happens here is that when the tag helper for the dropdown list is bound, the bind to collection that we're binding to is currently an IEnumerable of select list item, and that does not currently work with the tag helper. So we need to change that. I'm going to stop the server here. Let's find our item types, which is right here. And instead of a select list item, I want to return an IEnumerable of string because we want to just return the enum array as strings. Item types is the enum array that's defined right here. So we have a new list of item type enum. We're listing a bug, a chore, an impediment, and a PBI. These are all enums in an array, and we want to return that. So instead of a select list, what I want to do is actually return that item types array, and I want to convert each element to a string. So I'm going to call toString on each one of the elements, and this will return to me an IEnumerable of string. Now I can start up my server. Let's head over to the add page, call this item 3, and I'm going to select chore and click add. Okay, now item 3 is there, and that is the icon for a chore. So with the tag helpers, make sure you're binding either to objects, we're going to do this a little bit later, or you bind to an array of strings. Do not bind to an array of select list items. We're going to do the same thing on the details form. To get to the details form, you have to just click on one of these items, and you'll see this form right here. This is actually the details route, but the details route has the main razor page. Let's take a look at that. Here's the details razor page, and this has a switch statement in it depending on what screen we have selected. So we can navigate between the screens by clicking the details button, which will give us the details form, the tasks button, which will give us the tasks form, and the chit chat button, which will give us the comments form. So these are all the different screens, and depending on what's selected in the URL, that's what we're rendering as a partial here. So here, if we have details selected, we're rendering the partial details, which is that form. If we have tasks in the URL, we're going to render the partial tasks. And if we have chit chat, we're going to render the partial chit chat. Let's focus on this one right here, which is the details form. This will have the components that we're going to switch to Kendo. Now I've already started doing this. I already have the text box and the text area converted, just like we did in the previous lesson. What I don't have converted here are the drop-down lists. So we still have a few selects here that we're working with. As an exercise, go ahead and prepare these selects to be converted to drop-down lists by going to the code behind here and then converting these item types, statuses, and priorities collections from returning IEnumerable of select list item to returning IEnumerable of strings, just like we did in this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how we can style the drop-down items by using templates. If we take a look at the completed application, here is the details form, and you'll see that if I use the type drop-down, we have images or the icons for each of the different types of backlog items as part of the drop-down. And for priorities, we have these Bootstrap badge classes that are being applied for each of the dropdowns. There's a couple of things I want to mention though before we get to that. First, I've already placed these dropdowns on our page the same way we did in the last lesson. Here's the details form. This is the dropdown list for the item type. Here's the dropdown list for the selected status. And here's the dropdown list for the priority. And finally, we have a dropdown list to select an assignee. You can see that the structure is the same on every single one of these dropdown lists. We have a name. The name must match the property name that we're binding to. The value, which must also be that same property in the model. We have the items that we're binding to. And then I also added the style to make the width 100%. Let's take a look at the code. Here we have the properties that we're actually binding to. And just like we did in the previous lesson, I've converted the collections from IEnumerable of select list item to an IEnumerable of strings. And this is done for the item types, the statuses, and the priorities. However, I did not do this for the users collection because the users collection is a little bit different. The users collection specifies the text field name, which is the full name, and the value field name, which is ID. Since we're binding to objects, users is a list of PT user type, and we're not binding to just strings or enums, then we need to specify the value field and the text field. And that's what we're doing here. And if you're doing that, then the tag helper for DropdownList works fine. It works the same way as the HTML helper. Now, let's get into styling these and providing the templates. Telerik UI ASP.NET Core does not support server-rendered templates. It does support client-rendered templates though, so that's what we have to work with. As an exercise, go ahead and try converting the drop-down list that contains the item types to show the icons for the item types, and also the drop-down list for the priorities to show the badges for the priorities. If you need examples of these, you can take a look at the backlog page, and here you'll see the icons in the first column and the badges in the priority column. That'll give you an idea of where to pull these icons from and how to style these badges. Okay, let's do this together now. I'm going to start with a priority dropdown, and I'm going to specify an inline template here. So I'm going to add an attribute template, and this will take an HTML template using the jQuery UI template syntax. So for example, I'm going to add a span here, and the priorities enum is actually a list of strings. So each one of the items is referred to in the template as data. And the way we indicate this is by using hash colon and then data and then the closing hash. So anything inside of hash colon and the closing hash will be evaluated, and data in this case is the data item that we're iterating over. So for example, we have a list of strings here. In the dropdown, each item is going to be data itself. Let's take a look at this. I'm going to go to the details page, and I'm going to drop down priorities, and you can see that we're still getting the same priorities listed here as text. If instead of span, I had this as strong, then now you can see that each one of our items in the dropdown is bold. Now what I want to do is apply the Bootstrap badge class here. So I'm going to convert this back to span, and then I'm going to add a class, badge, and I'm going to close the span tag. Let's see what we have so far. Okay, so we have the badge class being applied, which makes the font bold and a little smaller, but we don't have the colors yet. I've included the priority classes in the site CSS that's already being loaded. So if we take a look at www.root and then site CSS, you'll be able to see priority critical, priority high, medium, and low, and these just have different colors. So we need to add these classes based on the priority that we have. Luckily, the names match. However, it's not going to work right out of the box. Let me show you what we need to do here. To the badge class, I'm going to add priority dash, and then the data that we have here is actually the name of the priority. So to enter templated syntax, I need to use hash colon data and then close it with a hash. So when the data is critical, for example, this will be priority dash critical. When data is low, this will be priority dash low. Let's take a look. For some reason, it doesn't work. Well, the reason for that is that this is actually case sensitive. The data items that are in here are capitalized, and our classes in our CSS is all lowercase. So because inside of this templated syntax, we are in JavaScript context, we can call JavaScript functions on the variables that are inside. Data is a variable, and we can call toLowercase because data is a string. And toLowercase is a JavaScript function that converts a string to a lowercase. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh here. And now you'll see that we have colored badges. We can do something similar for our type dropdown where we need the images. But instead of just having an inline template, I'm going to do something different here. I'm going to show you how you can specify a template that's a little bit more complex. So we don't want to have a complex template inline. It's just going to make the HTML messy. So instead of having an inline template here for the item types, I'm going to specify a template ID, and I'm going to create this template somewhere else on the page. So let's call this template item type. I'm going to copy that. And let's go down to the bottom here where I'm going to create a template. And the way you create a template in HTML is we create a script tag. Script tags are going to be ignored if they're of the type text/x kendo template. So this script tag will not be executed. It'll also not be shown. We just need to give this script tag an ID of template item type so that our component can find this template. And now I can define any markup I want using the templated syntax as well. So I want to start off with a span here. And inside the span, I want to give it the name of the type, which is going to be data itself. So I'm just going to do #data. But I also want to have the image. So I'm going to have an image tag here with a source. And here's where I can use a Razor URL helper here. And it's going to give us a URL where the content is stored, which is the www root folder. And from there, I want to get images/icon_ and then the name of the icon, which is actually data. So I'm going to switch to templates, #data.png. I'll also give this a class that's predefined, backlog icon. So just to show you what we're dealing with here, in the images folder, in the www root folder, we have our icon bug, icon chore, icon impediment, and icon PBI. That's where these icons will be rendered right here. Data here is going to be passed in as bug, chore, impediment, and PBI. And then backlog icon is just defined as a style for this page. Let's take a look. And now our dropdown has icons. So that's templated dropdown lists. We have another dropdown here, and that's the assignee dropdown. As an exercise, you can add the avatar of each assignee before the name of the assignee. We're going to do something similar a little bit later on the dashboard page where we're going to have the ComboBox dropdown with the assignees. But for now, let's convert the rest of this form to Kendo, and we only have one input left, and that's this estimate. Just for completion's sake, and to show you one more component that's pretty simple to implement, we're going to finish off the details form by implementing the estimate as a Kendo slider. Now right now, it's just an HTML input that's a range type, and this gives us the relative value. However, we don't see what we're selecting. There's no number here, and there's no other way to increment this besides dragging the slider. The Kendo slider actually gives us a lot more control. It has numbers along the bottom to show us approximately where we are in the range. It has buttons on the left and right side so we can increment and decrement. And it also shows what value we are selecting. So let's change this to a Kendo slider. Back in the code, on the details form, I'm going to head up to where we have the input that's type range. Let me give us a little more space here. And instead of that, I'm going to enter the Kendo slider component. Now here we can specify for and then the property to bind to. Just like the input is specifying ASP for, we can just specify for at model.estimate. Remember when I said that every Kendo component needs to have a name? Well, if you're in the model and you're using model binding inside a form like this, if you specify for, then you don't need to specify the name because for will handle that for you. And that's the only time when you don't have to specify the name. Now, the Kendo slider needs to have a minimum and a maximum, just like we do here. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it in here. Our range slider also has this step value. So this will indicate where the breakpoints are as you're sliding along. But the Kendo slider has more options than that. We have a large step and we also have a small step. So if we had a really long slider, we can break it up into large steps and small steps. I'm just going to use large step here. That's the equivalent of the HTML step, and I'm going to set that to 1. And let's also have it stretch all the way across. So I'm going to style this and I'm going to give it a width of 100%. Let's delete the old range and take a look at this. So there's our range input. And as you can see, it's quite visible what we're selecting because the number is hovered right above this handle here. And we have buttons to increment and decrement the estimate. We also have labels along the bottom so you know what the range is. So that's how simple it is to implement the slider. Now another requirement that we had here is to get rid of these buttons up here that switch between screens. Instead of the buttons, this would make sense as a tabbed interface. One of the new requirements for the RPS project tracker is to convert our details page interface to use a TabStrip instead of the buttons that we currently have there. So if we take a look at the completed application, we have a TabStrip here where we can switch between the details, tasks, and chit-chat tabs. And this is our goal. Notice that the URL updates when we switch these. If I go to a URL directly like chit-chat, then the correct tab will be selected. Now this is a big win for tag helpers because we can essentially reuse the markup that we already have that renders partial views for each one of these forms or screens as they're called in the application. And we can reuse these as Kendo TabStrip items. Let's take a look at documentation for a second. If we go to navigation, you'll find TabStrip right here. This will give you some basic usage and configuration Now you can see that TabStrip needs to have items, and then inside of that, you have TabStrip items with the content. So this is pretty declarative, and the way we create this is going to be very natural in an HTML document. So let's head over to our project, and we want to open up the details page, not the details form. That's the partial view. We want to open up the page itself, which is this one. I'm going to close everything else. Here are the buttons that we're currently using to navigate. We're going to the details page, and we're specifying the route screen as details, tasks, or chit chat. This is part of the routing spec that comes with ASP.NET Core. You can see that ASP-route dash, and then whatever parameter we want to pass. So in this case, ID. So we're passing in the ID of the item, and then the parameter screen, which gets parsed into the onGet method. All right, so we're rendering all this right here in a switch statement, and that depends on model.screen. So whatever screen we have selected, that's the partial page that we're going to be rendering. I'm going to leave this here because we can actually reuse some of this code when we implement the Kendo TabStrip. So I'm going to comment this out. Let's go over here. And by the way, as an exercise, you can try doing this yourself right now and see how far you can get with implementing the Kendo TabStrip yourself, and make sure that you get everything working as far as the selection of the proper tab based on the URL and changing the URL based on the selection of the tab. We're going to do that in the next few lessons. But let's start out with the basics of the Kendo TabStrip. So I'm going to use a tag helper here, Kendo TabStrip. We need to give it a name. I'm going to do this real simple. I'm going to just call this TabStrip. And the TabStrip must have items in it. These are the actual tabs. This is the collection. And inside of the items element, we're going to have the TabStrip items one at a time. So TabStrip item, we need a text for this one. I'll call this one details. Well, let's take a look at what we have so far. I'll refresh the page. We still have those buttons up there, but now we have this details tab with nothing in it. So our TabStrip is being rendered with just one tab in it. That's good. Let's continue. We need 3 tabs. So I'm going to copy this one 2 more times. One is going to be tasks, and another one is going to be chit chat. And inside of a TabStrip item, we're going to define content. Now, a TabStrip is a pretty powerful component that can let you render content by loading it on demand. I'm going to render everything right away and just switch between the tabs on the client. So all of our tabs are going to have content, and we're going to reuse the partials that we've already rendered here earlier. So for the details content, I'm going to render the details partial. So I'm going to copy that and paste it right in here. Notice I did not change anything else here. The name of the partial is still the same, and the model that we're passing in is still the same. So if I tap on details, you'll see that our form is still rendered here. And if I change something here and save it, you'll see that our title is updated. Now notice that we don't have the tab selected automatically. That's something we're going to fix a little bit later. Let's finish off this setup. We need content here for the tasks, and we also need content for chit chat. The formatting here is not working quite as well as it should, but that's okay. I'll fix it manually. And now I just need to copy this partial for the tasks, paste it right here in the content for tasks tab, and this partial for chit chat. I'll paste it right here. So having a declarative way to implement our TabStrip makes it really easy. Let's just verify to make sure everything works. I'm going to refresh the page, and let's navigate from tab to tab. There's details, there's tasks, and there's chit chat. In the next couple lessons, we're going to have the selection be automatic based on whatever screen we navigate to. And then we're also going to update the URL based on the selected tab. Our TabStrip is almost done. All we need to do is just have it change the URL when a new tab is selected so that the route is properly reflected. And we can do all this on the client side. We don't need to do any kind of postbacks because the contents of the tabs is already rendered on the page. So all we need to do is just change the URL on the client side. And we can do this thanks to the push state API that most modern browsers already support. Let's go to the code, and we're on the details page. Now down at the bottom, we have a scripts section. Let's open up a new script, and I'm going to create a function here called push URL. This will update the URL on the current page. So we're going to need a title and the new URL as parameters. And first I want to check to make sure that this browser does support push state. So if history.pushState is not undefined, then we're going to use it. I'm going to call history.pushState First parameter is going to be null. Second parameter is going to be the title. And the third parameter is the URL itself. However, if push date is undefined, then we can use a different API, window.location.assign, and just pass in the URL here. So that's a simple push URL function. Let's go ahead and use it when we actually change the tabs. So each TabStrip item provides us with an on-click event, and this is a client-side event that we can handle. So I'm going to go up here to the details TabStrip item and specify the on-click handler. Here I'm going to call push URL, which is the function we just created. I'm going to give it the new page title, RPS project tracker, and the new URL. So since we're clicking on the details tab, we want to make sure that details is in the URL. But the first part of the URL is the item ID, and we can get that from the model, model.item.id. But make sure that you start this off with a / model.item.id/details. We're going to do something similar with the other tabs. I'm going to go over here to the tasks tab and give it the on-click handler. And instead of details at the end, I'm going to say tasks. And same thing for the chit chat handler. Let's save this and take a look. I'm going to refresh. All right, so I'm going to click on tasks, and sure enough, our URL changed to tasks. Click on details, and our URL is updated. Now let's make sure everything works. I'm going to add a new task here, task 1, and there's our task 1. Let's rename this to task by Alex, and I'm going to have it done. Click on update, and that works as well. Let's go ahead and delete that. And on the chit chat screen, I'm going to add a new comment. Great, that works. So that's TabStrip event handling. Now TabStrip does have a lot more functionality, and you can take a look at the examples of what you can do on the demo site. Here's the basics of TabStrip on the demo site. You can actually control quite a bit. You can control the animation displayed. You can load the content with Ajax from a different route. You can make the tabs scrollable, and you have lots of different events that you can handle as well. There's some examples right there. We're going to switch away from the details page, and we're going to go back to the dashboard page so we can implement the ComboBox to complete the filtering for the dashboard and get ready for the charts. Before we leave simple components and get into more complex components in the next chapter, I want to show you one more component that's super useful, and it's the ComboBox. You can think of a ComboBox as a combination of a text box and a drop-down list. It'll allow you to select values from a drop-down, but also enter free text in the field. In our case, we're going to be binding the ComboBox to a list of users, which are complex objects, unlike what we did for the drop-down list, which are just strings. But both the drop-down list and the ComboBox support binding to complex objects. So I didn't want to show you that twice. That's why we're doing this in the ComboBox lessons. Let's take a quick look at the completed demo application so you know what the ComboBox looks like. On the dashboard page, we have the ability to filter by months, and we also have the ability to filter by assignee using this ComboBox right here. I can select an assignee just by clicking on one. I can clear the ComboBox, or I can search for one by typing in the name at the top. Now the ComboBox does have the ability to search and filter by querying the server. That's not what's happening here, and that's not what we're going to be doing. We don't have that many users, so we're rendering all the data right away as part of this dropdown. Let's take a look at the documentation so you can see where you can get more information. Here's the demo site, and under editors, you have the ComboBox. This will give you some basic information about how to set up the ComboBox and server examples, as well as server filtering examples. There's a lot more you can do with the ComboBox, like virtualization, grouping, and customizing templates. We will be customizing templates in the next couple of lessons. Let's get a basic ComboBox tag helper in place. Here is the tag helper demo if you need it. And this is essentially what we're going to be doing right here. So let's go over to our code, and I'm going to close the details page. Instead, we're going to head over to the dashboard page. So open that up, dashboard.cshtml, and we want to place the ComboBox right before the buttons. And this is going to be another button group. So I'm just going to make a copy of this div right here and close that off. And inside this div, I'm going to place the Kendo ComboBox, and we're going to use the tag helper here. Let's not forget the name attribute, and we're going to call this filter assignee. So there's a few attributes we need to specify in order to get the ComboBox working. We need a list of items that we want to bind to, and that is specified by the bind to attribute. In our case, we need to have a list of assignees that we want to bind to. So let's go to our model, which is the dashboard model right here. we currently don't have assignees in our model, so we need to get that in there. Right now, we just have the PT dashboard repository, but we also need the user repository. That's something we're already doing in the details code, so let's go ahead and get that from there. I'm going to open up details cs.html.cs file, and there's our user repository. I'm going to copy that. And back in the dashboard code, I'm going to need to add that in here. But in order to do that, I'm going to stop debugging temporarily while I'm working on the code. So let's paste this in here. And dependency injection is already hooked up and configured. So all I need to do is just add this to my dashboard model constructor. And that's going to be the IPT user repository. I'll call it RPS user data in the parameter. And then I'll set the RPS user repo to RPS user data. Now we can access all the users from this repository. So let's go over here and I'm going to create a couple of properties. One is going to be the selected assignee ID. So when we select a user from the ComboBox, we want to have its ID available here in the model. So I'm going to call this selected assignee ID. And notice that it's actually an integer, but it's a nullable integer. The reason for that is we can clear out the selection. So if we can clear out the selection, that means this selected assignee ID could be null, and that's a valid value. So we need to ensure that we're taking care of that when we're filtering the data. All right, and next we need a list of PT users to bind to. Public list of the type PT user, and this needs to be imported. I'm going to call this property assignees. Let's go down to our onGet method, and we're going to set assignees here. So assignees is going to be delivered to us from RPS user repo, and we're going to get all. This returns an IEnumerable, so I just need to call toList on this. Finally, our onGet method takes in a user ID. So if we do have something selected from the dropdown, it'll be passed in as the user ID right here. So let's just do a quick check. If user ID has a value, then we'll just set the selected assignee ID to user ID.value. And that's all the server-side code we need for now. So now on the dashboard front end, we can bind our ComboBox to model.assignees. Let's go ahead and start up the server here. So there's our ComboBox right there. It's rendered and we have object in there. That's not very useful, is it? For those of you that are familiar with JavaScript, you see this quite often when you don't specify what property you want to display. So that's what's happening here. Let's go back to the code. There's a couple more attributes we need to specify. First, we need to actually specify the value that's selected, and that's going to be model.selected assignee ID. Now, since we're binding to assignees, which is a list of PT users, the ComboBox needs to be told what values to display in the dropdown. And we do that by setting the data text field attribute. Each one of our PT users has a full name property. So we're going to set that as a string. And we also need to tell it what the value field is now. So that's data value field. And the value field is just ID. I'm going to save this and let's take a quick look. I'm going to refresh. Our dropdown now has users in it. Now some names might be a little bit longer. So let's add a little style here. We can do this just like we do with any other of the Kendo UI components here. We can add an inline style attribute with the width set to 260 pixels. I also want to let the user know if nothing is selected in the box, then we should probably display a helpful message. We can do that with the placeholder attribute. This is just going to be a string that says select assignee. All right, let's see. Okay, right now we're on the dashboard page. We don't have anything selected in the filter. It says select assignee here, so I know exactly what's going on. I can click on the drop-down list, select the user, let's say Barbara Pfeffer, but nothing happens. So the user ends up in the ComboBox, which is nice, but we don't have filtering happening. I can also clear this out. So the ComboBox is fully functional now, but it's not reacting to changes, and that's something we're going to do in the next lesson. So let's take a look at ComboBox events next. In this lesson, we want to make sure that we're filtering the data based on the ComboBox selection of assignees. Right now, if we select one of the assignees here from the dropdown, nothing happens. So we need to respond to events, or one specific event actually. In our case, we're going to use the onChange event. There are quite a few other events that you can support, and you can take a look at the documentation for that. But we're going to be using the onChange event, so let's go right to it. Here we're going to use the client-side event. And our onChange event is actually going to take us to a new URL with the updated parameters in the URL. So our eventual goal for this lesson is to have the ComboBox trigger an event and that event is going to place a new parameter in the URL. I'm going to add the onChange attribute here, and I'm going to specify what JavaScript function to call. And this is going to be onAssignEChange. So that's all we need to do is just specify this JavaScript function. Now we need to define it. I'm going to go down here to the bottom where we already have some scripts defined. Let's create a function called onAssignEChange. This will take in some arguments, and we need to parse those arguments in order to get the value or the ID that's selected. That's going to be the user ID. So var user ID is going to equal to e.sender. Sender is the ComboBox, and the value that's currently selected. So there are two cases that could happen here. One is the user ID will be present because we've selected a user. Another one is if we clear out a user, then the user ID will be undefined here. So we need to check that. And I'm going to do a truth check here in JavaScript. So if user ID, then we're going to set the location.href. So we're going to navigate our browser to a new place. And I'm going to use JavaScript template syntax here first to specify a parameter called user ID. That's going to be this user ID that we've just received. And we also need to pass in the months. We'll get to that in a second because we don't want to clear out the months filtering. We want to have that filter combined. So we'll be back to that in a second. Let's handle the other case. If user ID is undefined, we want to go to location, href, and here we're going to remove the user ID because it's not selected at all. So here, all we're going to need is the months parameter. Okay, so how do we get the months parameter? Well, here you can see an example of how we've built up the user ID parameter. We're going to do the same thing with months. So months param equals an empty string for now. And then if months is not equal null, we're going to set months param equal to months equal sign and then months. Remember, this months right here is a variable in C# that we've created in our Razor page right at the top here. So now we have our months parameter that we can append here and here. Let's do the case where the user ID is blank. So I'm going to say slash, and now we need to just pass in the months parameter. And if I just pass in months param like this, then this is going to be URL encoded, and that's not what we want. We actually want this to be raw. So html.raw helper is going to help us do that, just like that. And in the case where user ID is not null, we also want to tack on the months param. So I'm going to copy this right here. And right after the user ID, I'm going to add an ampersand and paste in this code. So we're going to tack on the months param to the user ID param. Let's check this out. I'm going to refresh the page. There's a few cases we want to check here. We want to make sure that when we select a user, the page will refresh and the user ID will be in the URL. So I'm going to select Alex Ziskin. I know that my user ID happens to be 21 here. So I'm going to select that and user ID equals 21. That works. There is no months parameter because we didn't click on a filter yet here, but we are getting the data filtered by my user. So now I'm going to clear out this ComboBox to make sure that that works. And sure enough, the ComboBox is clear and we've navigated away from that. So now we don't have a user ID defined in the URL. I'm going to click on 1 year. And there we go. We have 12 months in the URL. Now I'm going to select a different assignee here. This one happens to have user ID equals 2. So we have user ID and the months in the URL. So that's working fine. Now, one of our requirements is to actually have user avatars right here next to the user names. We can do that by implementing templates. We've already seen templates in the DropdownList lessons. This is going to be pretty similar. In this lesson, we're going to add templates to our ComboBox dropdown items so that we can display the name of the assignee along with their avatar. Now, you've already done templates before earlier in this chapter. You've used the templates inline and using template ID when you implemented dropdowns on the details page. I want you to take that knowledge right now and try to apply it to the ComboBox. And there's no trickery here. This will work pretty much the same way. So I want you to go ahead and try that. You can use the demo documentation for the ComboBox and take a look at the customizing templates section if you need help. All right, let's do this together now. I'm going to head over to the code and let's go back up to where we defined the ComboBox right here. And I'm going to use an external template here. I'm not going to have an inline template because the template is going to be more than 2 lines. So I don't want it to mess up the code here. So I'm going to specify, instead of template, I'm going to specify template ID, and that's going to be template assignee. Now, it's important for you to understand that this template actually gets rendered on the client side. This does not get rendered on the server side. Let's go ahead and get the name of that. And I'm going to go down here right before our style section, and I'm going to create a new script section that's going to be our template with an ID of template assignee. And I need to specify the type to be text/xkendo template. Here we can create whatever template we want. Let's say I use the word hello in here. That means that all our items are going to use that template, and all our items are just going to say hello like that. But that's not what we want. We want to actually use the data. So the data in this case is going to be the individual user, the PT user type, and that has a full name property on it. So in order to get the data displayed, we open up our template syntax here with the #, and then say data.full_name. Now this should be pretty much the same that we've had it before, where it's going to display the name of each user. And there we go. So we want to decorate this a little bit more and add some more styling here and an avatar. I'm going to wrap that span in a div. I'm going to give it a bootstrap class of row. I'm also going to give it a little bit of more margin here on the left side, margin of 5 pixels. And let's go ahead and move that span inside that div. Another nice benefit to specifying the template in its own script tag instead of inline is that you get full HTML syntax highlighting here. You wouldn't get that as a string if you just specify a template inline. Okay, so now we have a div. I'm going to add a little bit of styling here to the span as well by adding a margin of 5. So I'm going to copy that one and paste it here. Now I just want to add the image, which is going to be an image tag, and the source is going to be the avatar, and the avatar is actually part of the PT user type. So it's available on our data. I'm going to use the URL helper here to build up the URL to the content. And here I'm just going to have our templating syntax, data.avatar. I'm going to close that. And I'm going to give our image some bootstrap styling. Li avatar is actually our own style, and then rounded is coming from Bootstrap, MX Auto also from Bootstrap. Let's take a look at what this looks like now. Okay, so now we have all our users and we have their avatars, and the filtering also works. Since we're on the dashboard page, in the next chapter, let's fill out the rest of the dashboard page and add a chart to display the data.